Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Scooby-Dooby-Doo ya.
All right, Chris Rice is in the house. The song that ruined his career. That was too bad. You know, he couldn't perform a concert without all of his fans saying,
Do you sing that to your
song,
kids?
play the cartoon song.
I don't think I've introduced it. I know I did introduce it to them once, but
They weren't thrilled.
they're like, who are these people?
Yeah.
I don't.
Who's Beavis and that other guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to share that.
What's his name, Dad?
yeah, who's the other guy?
I thought we can't say those words.
No, what a shining moment in the history of Christian music. Last week we had asked what's the best compliment you'd ever received, and we all struggled through. Well, Jess, you nailed it. Alex and I kind of fumbled.
Didn't have as much time to process
Yeah.
I had the same amount of time. I had less time than you.
as I would like. I didn't have as much time as I would like.
I want to say thank you to those who wrote in and commented and boosted Alex and I's self-esteem with a compliment. That was very nice of you. It did mean a lot. But we also asked you to share with us, and Lynn on Facebook said, best compliment, when I walk into your home, I feel comfortable and loved. That's always good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is.
You want to be hospitable.
When you go into people's houses and you feel like you don't know where to sit, you don't know if you can even ask for a glass of water, everything's uptight, like that's no fun.
Like I think one of the biggest things for me is like the awkward moment where you are like, shoes or no shoes? You know, do I have to take off my shoes? And then you I always kind of look at the feet of the person that are in the house to kind of
When they
gauge
answer the
that,
door,
Process.
you know.
do they have shoes on or
Yeah.
not?
So
The thing I loved about Lynn's comment was I saw that on Facebook and I looked underneath it and someone said, I've been to your
affirmed it,
house
yeah.
and that's how I feel.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yay. Love
so
it.
if you want tips, Lynn, send us some tips on how you do that, how you make
Lynn,
your home
yes.
feel comfortable and loved.
Do
and
you
we can-
put your shoes on when you answer the door just so they don't feel forced to take their shoes off?
That's overthinking it,
is it?
and
Oh, okay.
we can talk about that in another episode. I do have a question though.
Okay.
So somebody this week asked me what my favorite movie quote was, and I had to think about it a little bit because I like lots of different movies. But then I started overthinking, like we just maybe were a little bit with the shoes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I like this movie, but then no one watches it with me because I quote so much of it. And mine was Lord of the Rings is like a movie that I can watch and
Like
I'm
all of
quoting it as it goes,
The
not
first
all
of
of
the
it.
trilogy?
Yeah.
Or- okay.
And as it goes, I can just like say like whole lines of quotes because I've watched it so many times.
wow.
That's like a little.
For me, I have two different movies. And
Okay,
they
what are
probably
yours?
couldn't be more
I'm
different.
shocked you
Can
watch
anyone
movies.
guess?
They couldn't probably be more different. Two of them. One of them is Napoleon Dynamite.
Oh my
Okay.
Lanta! I'm not surprised.
Technology, but not as much as you see.
Do you know the Napoleon dance?
I will not comment. And the other one is The Notebook. If you're a bird, I'm a
Really?
bird.
Do you quote it to Aaron?
I don't just walk up to her and quote it, but I do. I like that movie. If we watch it, like I know a lot of it, and I'm a big Nicholas Sparks.
Oh, okay,
fan.
avid reader, fan, movie
Yeah,
watcher.
yeah.
All right,
So
that's good
Both
to
of
know.
those movies are of a certain era too, like at the same time frame, kind of. Like,
Yeah,
It must have been
Just
when you were a
very,
big movie watcher.
Very different
Back in-
situations.
yeah.
Yeah. The Notebook is so sad, and Napoleon Dynamite is probably
kills
one of my
brain cells.
favorite movies, but it's one that you don't really talk about because people were so sick of it in the time. It
Yeah.
just got overplayed so much that people just didn't want anything to do with it.
Well, Eric, what's yours?
La Fonda.
Where we're going, we don't need roads, I guess. I don't know. I love Back
movie.
to the Future.
Okay.
That's my favorite movie of all time. And every time I was home
Classic.
from school sick, I would take the VHS of the movie that I ripped off TV and would watch that and fast forward through the commercials.
I was picturing you saying, "Hey, you guys."
Goonies is also up there.
Goonies, yeah.
Goonies is probably in my top 3 movies of all
Yeah,
time that I
me too. That's a
good
I
one.
really like Goonies. I don't know that, but I would be really annoyed if I was watching Lord of the Rings with Jess. So
Yeah, you would.
I don't like people to talk during movies. It drives me nuts. And so like I'm not the
I
one
would
who's going to
respect you,
quote
Eric.
the movie all the time.
I'd whisper to myself.
I'd just be over there talking
I
to
do have
yourself
to
like
say
a crazy
that
person.
my husband Ben, all the Rocky movies, if it comes on TV, he can have his back turned and I will push play, and he in like less than 30 seconds can say what's happening and which Rocky it is.
Oh, wow.
It's incredible.
That is incredible.
Good job, Ben.
That's like those people that can hear the first note of a song and know what it is.
I mean, I guess share what your movie is that
If you're watching this
Favorite
or
movie
listening,
or one you can quote.
Yeah, I would like to see get a grasp on that. I made a movie reference recently in the office, and I realized that a lot of the residents didn't even know the movie I was talking about. And
shoot.
And it's like it's making me feel old because the movie came out in 1988, and I feel like everyone should know a movie from 1988,
And
right?
is that the one Mark shared?
They weren't born yet.
Yeah.
In staff development.
Yeah, there's a little reference to a Danny DeVito, Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, it's twins, and
Yeah.
it just nobody got the reference.
Well.
I guess it's a sign of old age. But yeah, we'd love to hear your comments.
Yeah.
What's your favorite movie? What's
Maybe it's some we
our
haven't
movie
seen yet.
quote? Up next, we've got headlines. Our first headline comes from Omaha.com. It says Omaha Zoo's Hubbard Gorilla Valley reopens after $7 million renovation project. I didn't know it was closed.
You didn't?
No.
How often do you zoo, Eric?
Because that has been closed, you have
haven't-
to walk a full circle
Yeah.
around the zoo. It's like
Really?
a mile and a half.
I haven't been to the zoo in a while.
Okay.
When,
yeah.
if you had to guess, the last time you went to the Henry Dorley Zoo.
It was last year,
Okay.
Okay.
but I don't remember that. When did this close? How long
It
has
was like
been
that,
closed?
the aviary, a lot of it was closed, and so
Madagascar
you could
was
never
closed.
kind of get through there.
Oh, okay. Actually, you know what? I think I remember seeing some of that stuff closed. Now that I'm having this conversation,
we've-
but it's been a while. It's been a while.
Probably didn't know exactly what was closed.
What was
'cause
happening?
there was
Now
a
we
lot.
can confirm.
Okay.
Yes, it
So
was
this
Gorilla
is
Valley.
this is reopened now. Can you touch the gorillas now?
I'm not.
No,
that's
not
probably
sure.
not
And maybe
safe.
stronger glass, so
Okay.
they have less a chance of touching you. You
They
guys
probably have
remember
more
that
space.
when the kid was like teasing the gorilla and it came up and broke the glass? It's the same place.
Okay. So all of
I'm
that's better
excited.
now.
I'm excited to see
But
this. I
neither
feel
of
like-
you have seen it in person yet,
No,
right?
Not
but I
yet.
feel like everything the zoo has done recently, I love.
It is, yeah. The zoo, it's amazing. And I mean, I have kids and we have a membership. And so my wife typically, my kids went to zoo camp this summer. They loved that. It was a long drive, but thank goodness for carpooling. What
Yep.
are you looking at me for, Mike?
It's a long drive, I
It's a
know,
long
from
drive,
Westo.
yes. Oh my. Anyway, so I love the zoo, and I get there a couple times a year. I was
Yeah, it's
bummed a couple weeks ago during that huge storm. Actually, my community group here at the church, we were going to have like an end of the summer kind of gathering there, and one of the couples rented the splash pad just literally for us, and then we were going to have food and stuff there, and like that day was when all the storms had happened. Not the one that knocked out all the power, but one a couple weeks ago when the flooding happened. And so a water main broke. And
Darn
so
it.
we weren't so that was a bummer because our kids were looking forward. I think I was looking forward to it too.
Yeah.
But
I know you love splash pads.
I love me a good splash pad.
Anyways, this is exciting. I think it'll be fun. Just when I think the zoo like can't outdo itself in something with the space that it has, looks awesome. So
Well, we'll have to check it out.
yes, we will.
I mean,
Maybe we'll have to go on a
podcast
field
from there.
Yeah, we'll field trip.
Is it? It's. I mean, our zoo's ranked pretty high out of all the zoos in the country, or right?
Yeah, it's
I
always
mean,
like flirting. I feel like those things are always arbitrary depending on the magazine or
where it's
what.
located.
To us in Nebraska, we are number one.
Number one.
I mean, I was looking it up, the top 25 zoos, and we made number 7.
All right.
So
We'll take. I mean, I take a top 10.
that's not bad, I guess. The top 7. We're the 7th best zoo.
According to that resource. Sounds wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. But if you do, I mean, I don't know if this is location based, but if you Google top 10 zoos, it's San Diego, then Omaha. So
Well, according to us,
And
Uncomfortable Podcast,
Google.
you're number one, Henry Dorley.
Yep.
I'm trying to think of all the zoos I've been to. in my life.
You can't think of any because you're just thinking of this one, right?
I know.
See?
I think I went to the one in Sioux Falls. They had monkeys, so that was a pretty good zoo.
Good.
Shout out to the Sioux Falls Zoo. All right, our next headline comes from WOWT.com. It says Elkhorn teacher on administrative leave after sharing posts comparing masks to KKK hoods.
Yikes.
So, I mean, I saw this floating around on social media recently and I mean, she's been administrative leave, so I guess that doesn't mean an official firing.
Yeah, I think Tuesday is when parents started sharing it with the school, and then that's when they decided to put her on administrative leave.
To give people a little bit of context, the meme is an image of a KKK hood and then an image of a mask, and it says, "It's strange they can breathe in this," relating to the KKK hood.
Isn't it strange?
Isn't it strange they can breathe in this, but not this, the mask? So pretty much equating, anybody who is an anti-masker is a racist or something like that. I mean,
Could be
again,
taken that way for sure. Yeah.
no surprise here to see something on social media take these really broad strokes and try to lump everyone together into one category, which is just, I mean, you would think that a teacher would know better, right? But
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that I would think know better on doing things on social media.
Okay, but even talking about social media, it's just so easy to, oh yeah, that's great, share. I mean, we just like have almost this thoughtless way of, oh, I like this is funny, not really thinking about the repercussions or who it might offend.
Yeah, or the considerations.
Yeah.
Because I'm guessing, and I always like to give a person the benefit of a doubt, that it was more of like, oh yeah, that's funny. Like these people don't want their kid, because that's been in that district a big hot thing right now is are they going to wear masks or not? So in the Omaha community, it's a big debate. I think that's it is a pretty suburban, Caucasian influenced kind of space. And so there's probably just some of those thoughts in the mind and not really thinking of the consequences or all the ramifications of this. It's just like, oh, that's funny. It gets across a point, and it's very, it's disgusting at its core, but when you see it, you're like, okay, it's an embellishment, obviously, of something. And so,
and I see this teacher said that, I mean, they're saying their political views outside the classroom are not part of their job, that they're good at their job. But also, it's like, as a parent, if I saw that a teacher sharing something that was offensive and derogatory like that, I mean, to me, that doesn't influence how I view that teacher and leaving my kids with that teacher. So,
and there was a parent they interviewed that it is interesting how learning someone's political leanings or whatever, learning that you have a disagreement with someone, how it starts to shade your view of them. Because I watched a parent that was interviewed, and I think she had a kid in the class and was like, we've loved this teacher. She's awesome. Like, she's been great for my kid. I love that my kid's in that class. But now seeing this, I can't trust them. And so it's kind of like what she's done in the classroom, you have no dissatisfaction with, but now you've got a distrust in that teacher because maybe she thinks differently politically, or maybe, and there might be a worry that she's, influencing your child in that kind of way, especially in this like climate.
Right. Even if it's not directly, it's still
a polarizing.
I would think, indirectly, are you going to do or say something? So it's
like the old saying of don't talk politics at the dinner table, don't talk politics on social media anymore. I mean, it's
I guess
it's just
right. It's like, can she?
Well, I don't even know that it's talking I mean, it's an extreme post like that is probably where the most heat is caught. Like I'm guessing, that she's like, yeah, that was probably silly that I shared that. That's not my heart in it and what she's even said, and probably regrets it. But it just gives that more of a pray before you post kind of thought in my mind. So.
Yeah, it's interesting to say the least that but I think people just react to it. Like you said, in the moment they see something and they go, okay, well, this further pushes my agenda in a way, and I can use this to get people on board, and they probably don't even think about the collateral damage of what that's actually saying, that it's just assuming that any parent who is against wearing a mask falls into this other category,
Yeah. And if you think about the kids, like if this teacher gets removed, right, as a great teacher, has a great track record, and then the teacher gets removed, and you've got to tell your kid, why is Mrs. Whatever not my teacher anymore? She's awesome. Well, it's not because she's a bad teacher, but
she shared a meme.
She made a mistake, but I think for a kid at that age, I don't know what grade she teaches, the other ramifications, in parenting could be difficult. So,
yeah, and I think the irony around all of this is if it was flipped, I've seen stuff like this shared going the other direction.
By a parent, yeah.
Even the other argument,
okay.
And it would be, and it's under the guise of free speech, right? And so even in this, I've seen parents come to her side saying, "Oh, this is free speech. She should be fine," But it's just this isn't directly correlated. But I saw an interview with some dad who was talking about their kid. I don't even think it was in our state, but about kids going back to school and having to wear masks, and you could tell he was very against it. But he was saying that his son didn't really care, and that, well, actually his son really liked it because he thought he was a ninja when he wore it. And it was just this thing of where, as parents, sometimes we make these issues into our own more than even knowing how the kids really feel about it. Even before we even ask them what their feelings are, we're just like, well, I don't like it, so they don't like it, And
obviously we make extreme statements. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very true.
I like, what'd you say? Pray before you post?
Is that your new? Obviously, I don't know her. I think I preached it one time, Eric, and maybe even
I might have taken a note.
That was very
or
familiar to me when you said that.
I'm sure it's in my notes somewhere.
I think it's on your
post.
You got to post it now.
Follow at Alex Ely on Instagram.
Yep, that's where it's at.
It's like we should make kind of an app for people, and then you like save your posts in that app.
You could filter for them.
And you can pray before it allows you.
Yes. Submit any posts to me, please.
Could be a new side hustle.
Podcast at cccomaha.org, and we will tell you if you should post it or not.
I like this plan.
Attention, Alex, because I don't have time.
We're about to get really busy. I have a feeling. All right, up next, we're going to be talking about screen time with Dr. Marie Belin. Today we're joined by Dr. Marie Belin. Thank you so much for taking some time out to come hang out with us and talk a little bit about screen time, everyone's favorite subject. Before we dive into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, just let's get to know you a little better.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. So I'm a pediatrician here in Omaha. And I think it's been 4 or 5 years ago, my sister, I have a wonderful sister-in-law, and we have lots of conversations, honest conversations about parenting. And I was sharing with her, every month it seemed like I was getting a new journal article in my pediatrics journals about the effects of screens on children in various ways. And she was in charge of doing a practical parenting class for her church and asked if I had anyone in mind that could come and talk about that topic of screen time with her class. And I thought and just couldn't come up with anyone. And she finally said, well, what about you? Because really what I want you to say is what we've been talking about for like the last year. And again, I thought, and I've never done anything like that before, but I thought, I spend most of my hours in clinic teaching and lecturing in a sense. So maybe it's not that different to do it for a group of adults instead of children. So I did. And then my brother-in-law, who's a pastor in town, asked if I would come and speak to their whole church for a Sunday school session. And I did. And that was recorded. And then it kind of went mini viral, I would say, just small localized pandemic viral. And so then started getting asked by different groups in town, MOPS groups, local schools to come and give the talk. So that's how I got into this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And that's how I was introduced, not to you, but that's how I decided to cold email you. Was my wife was a part of one of those MOPS groups here at the church. And I remember her coming home that day. We've got 4 kids. And this is always something I've had a passion around with middle schoolers because I've seen just not screens necessarily, but pornography and some of those things, identity issues ruin the lives of kids, and had a heart for that. But also, like, as a parent, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And so she's like, you need to have her on the podcast. So we reached out before the pandemic, and then we were like, okay, now everyone is at home and all of their jobs are on screens and all of schooling is on screens. Maybe let's not have that conversation right now when everybody's going to feel terrible about themselves. And so hopefully we've
We'll just
lowered
wait
the
a little
terrible
bit.
factor for that. And so thanks again. It's been, I feel like, a long time in the making, but glad to have you around the table for this conversation.
Glad to be here.
So tell us what, you kind of hinted at it, but what really got you interested in this topic, and also where did you really see the need for it to be maybe brought to the forefront of people's attention?
Yeah, well, it was mostly forced on me. Medicine is interesting. We're always about 10 years behind, especially in pediatrics, because we don't like to make broad stroke proclamations about something that hasn't been studied throughout a child's whole childhood. And so something that might look one way when a child's 6 months old has absolutely zero effect on their life when they're 12 years old. And so most pediatric studies are what are called longitudinal studies, and they take about 10 years. So the iPhone came out in 2007, and about 10 years later and then became sort of in everyone's pocket a few years after that. Yeah. So that puts you into 2018, 2019, where these longitudinal studies were coming to an end, and the results were just sort of incredibly shocking, but also overwhelming in how dramatic they were. And so every month there was a new article, a new statement of, this is the effect it has on language development. This is what it's doing for depression. And so it was through reading those that I realized this was something I needed to add to my practice, that this was as important as helmet use and seatbelts, that we needed to be having a device talk, a screen time talk with the parents as well. And it needed to start almost from birth the way it is now.
Yeah. I know my kids had, there was this game called Peekaboo Barn that they played when they were like 6 months old. They just touched the barn door and the animal would show up.
It makes the fun noise.
Yeah. It was great.
It was a great game.
So were you seeing, outside of the research, and have you seen any of these, like, as you've practiced, like as parents have brought in things maybe, and then you're like, oh, as I'm reading the research and this is coming in, this is starting to shed light on maybe some of the issues that some of the kids have been having that are part of your, that you care for, or are you not quite seeing that wave yet, would you say?
No, especially with my teens. I'm definitely seeing it. So suicide became the second leading cause of death for American kids / teenagers 10 to 20 years old, just in the late 2000s. And so the increase in depression and anxiety, I've felt throughout my whole practice that's the epidemic of West Omaha. That's where I practice, is anxiety and depression, and that it is just so prevalent. And as I started reading these articles and finding out the huge, almost causal link between screen time, especially social media, and depression, it just helped me to ask better questions to my patients that were struggling with anxiety and depression, and to realize that I needed not just to talk about their sleep and what's going on at home and at school, but actually ask, how many hours a day are you spending on a screen? And that is so linked to how severe and how prevalent their anxiety and depression is going to be. More than an hour and a half a day on social media leads to a 71% increased risk of suicide in teenagers. You could smoke a pack a day for your whole life, and it only increases your risk of lung cancer by 16%. So in my mind, smoking is, you're going to get lung cancer. That's what we all grew up on. And even as a doctor, that's what I think. And we need to really start thinking about social media use as the number one risk factor for suicide, which is the second leading cause of death for kids.
Are there, in those studies, what types of, because in of itself, social media can't it's for me, I can't hear that and go, oh, okay, well, social media is killing people, right? It's kind of like the gun argument, you know? So in it being a tool that facilitates a lot of different things, what specifically are you seeing in those studies that are correlating to suicide? Is it bullying? Is it their own self-worth, their way they view themselves comparing to other people, or do you see patterns in that specifically that we can look for?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And this is then where we have to move from science to opinion, because no one was expecting when they did these studies to find that huge link in depression and suicide. So they didn't bother to piecemeal out what kind of social media. They just grouped them all together. And then frankly, in that 10-year study, some versions of social media didn't even exist, like TikTok.
Right.
So that wasn't included in the study. So it's gonna take another 10 years to figure out, is it texting? Is it Facebook? Is it Instagram? What is it?
Yeah.
So I can't quote you any statistics on that, but I do think just logically it makes sense that the more voyeuristic the social media use is, the more that the person, and I'm sure it's true for adults just like it is for teenagers, it's just those are the journal articles I read, that the more the teen is using social media to watch and to learn about someone that they really have no chance of ever meeting in real life. They have no real relationship with. There's no ability to get, a healthy relationship where there's fulfillment passed both ways, where it's a chance for encouragement and growth, iron sharpening iron, things like that. The more it's just watching someone who they don't know and never will know, that my guess is what leads more and more to dissatisfaction with life, feeling hopeless. And we've all kind of experienced that. I know I have. I start out by trying to figure out which wall color to go with, and then, there's all these sparkly things on the right that I start clicking on. I'm down a rabbit hole. 3 hours later,
your Amazon cart is full.
Exactly. Yeah. And then 3 hours later, I log out and I'm like, wah, wah. I just feel so inadequate. And man, my house doesn't look like Magnolia, and just leave feeling less fulfilled, instead of if I'd spent those 3 hours in conversation, having coffee with Jess or someone like that. Instead, I leave just feeling energized and so blessed in my life. And so my guess it's going to be something like that. Cyberbullying and everything else aside. And that's why I think that's the link with social media as opposed to just being online, because having a phone opens you up to cyberbullying. But it's something about just observing instead of experiencing real life.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that it even like being on the mental health side of things, like just being able to, like, I'm affirming, like I'm seeing those things too, where it's like, that's something that I've even integrated into like my intakes and first parts of sessions is like, how often are you on social media? Like, how often would you check it? There are some people where I've had them put like you can download an app that says how many times that you're checking or looking at your screen. And it's just very interesting as you're kind of dissecting because we're just so complex, but just dissecting those things, how they're so tied together. But so then that kind of leads me into the next part for me. My kids are young, and 2, 5, and 7. And so we're just kind of like on the cusp of screen time, and they think it's really cool. But then at the same time, we had COVID, and all my kids learning, even when they were little, like preschool, pre-K, everything was on a screen. Like they're watching, their teachers were uploading to YouTube, and there was, I think it was at least 2 hours a day that my littles were expected to just be watching a screen. And so to me, like even hearing things like that of you shouldn't let your kids be a part of screen time, there's this guilt that's associated with it. So how do you kind of balance all of those things where we kind of have had to, but there's just kind of like this underlying guilt. Maybe no one's like shaming me or anything, but I feel it, or I'm projecting it onto myself.
No, absolutely. And honestly, that's one of my greatest fears in giving the talks, because it's so different than when I have you in clinic. And when I know my patients and I know their family, I can look in a new mom's eyes, and who's got the 3-year-old running around while she's trying to nurse her newborn. And I can say, did you know that a Curious George episode is about the length of time it takes to nurse a newborn, and give them that freedom that's what technology is for, and it can be a huge blessing in our life. And so my main message that I hope people are hearing is just trying to be more intentional and not just entertain ourselves to death is the title of a really great book. And it's true that it's so easy just to let the waves of culture sweep us in without pausing to think, is this right? And absolutely, for those who are feeling guilty, they are not alone. We're all in the same boat. I mean, in 1970, the average age of first screen exposure was 4 years old. Now it's 4 months. And just between 2001 and 2013, daily screen use for children went from like 36% to 96%, I think it is. Yeah, that's the right stat. So 39% to 96%. So it's so new. And I think I was listening in on your guys' conversation on raising children in the age of social media. And someone said, we're just making it up as we go along. And that is so true. We all are. And so we're all just, as parents, desperately trying to do the best we can. And that's all God asks of us. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, and His grace is sufficient for everything, including my parenting. Thank God.
Amen to that.
Yeah. So if we start to, figure out some of these things, because I think part of it is as well being reactive parents and proactive parents, and I, like I said to you offline, but I worked in student ministry for like almost a decade, and so most of the problems that would come into the office were due to reactive parenting instead of proactive parenting, especially online. But at the same time, how are you supposed to be proactive when like your parents didn't have to deal with any of this, and you, which gets into the we're making this up on the fly kind of thing. And so I remember, for example, going, my parents would go to like a marriage conference, every so often, and then they would come home, and then they got a whole new chore list, and we're going to change the way we do family, okay? Everyone is going to do all 3 of their chores, check them off on the refrigerator every day before you talk to any of your friends and go outside. Well, when you're so far into how you do family and building habits, it's so hard, to change that. So like every time we're like, okay, we'll see how long this lasts. And so I think it feels like that sometimes as a parent when you're like, okay, I know this is good. I know there's pros to this. I know that these are steps we should start to take as I'm seeing this. But it's difficult, when you've done family in a certain way for so long, when your kid is glued to Cocomelon and they're freaking out. Which is Cocomelon a cult, would you say? I mean,
What? I don't know what Cocomelon is.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a cult. Anyway.
Is that something online?
Alex.
That I'm totally
It's
out of
not
it?
actually. No.
It is.
It's like a YouTube.
I sang it to my kids.
Yeah. They're in a cult now, officially.
Little nursery rhymes.
So anyway,
See, my kids are too old now. I'm so out of it.
how do you start to like help families? How do we start to change some of these habits maybe that we've built that are bad habits, but we're just ignorant to? We don't know it.
Yeah, I love that you phrased it as what do we do as a family, because that's number one key. We've learned a lot from the obesity epidemic in pediatrics that when you have a child who's at an unhealthy weight, there's absolutely no way that child will ever achieve a healthy weight without the entire involvement of the whole family, the whole family making these lifestyle changes together. And so it's the same way with media use. So the American Academy of Pediatrics has a great resource. It's healthychildren.org. And they have something called a family media plan. And it's a very simple sort of screen-by-screen process of starting to help the family to decide, first of all, for the parents, how do you begin to have this conversation with your children? And then how do you start making the decisions of what you do want to limit, what you want to cut out, things like that. So that's one resource. Another really great one I actually brought a copy of that's new that I'm a huge fan of is through the WeStartNow.org group. They're out of Kansas City, and they have group studies, family studies, lots of different resources that just walk you through, a step-by-step process to decide what's right for your family. What are your goals? Because they might be different than mine. And it gives you a very personalized way of achieving those at the end. And so that's another really fantastic thing through START. But if if I am thinking of what is, is there one really big low-hanging fruit that you wanted to make a change as a family, I think the first thing I would latch onto would be the social media usage, and really having a conversation with your older children, if they are already having their own account, and then also starting the conversation young with children. So it's not, quote, the talk, it's a lifelong conversation of, this is something that that your other friends might be accessing early. But just like you might want a red Ferrari when you're 16, and that's not something your dad and I plan to buy for you, this is another thing. Get ready to be disappointed because for the parents, and sometimes we make those hard decisions. So the social media usage, and then also with phones, I think the number one protective thing that a parent could do for a child with a phone is never letting them sleep with the phone in their room. That the phone goes to bed when they go to bed. I think most of the cyberbullying, most of the dangerous behavior like sexting, talking with your, quote, new friend who you think is a 13-year-old boy but ends up being a 62-year-old man, that most of that behavior happens in the middle of the night. Most of the just the awful things that, kids don't really have much of a frontal lobe at 15 anyway. And then you put some fatigue in it, and at 2 a.m., they're just making horrible decisions. They say type things they would never say to someone face to face. And so just eliminating that risk factor for your children and having the phone not accessible to them at all in the middle of the night is, that's gold right there.
Do you think with that, are there other alternatives to managing that though? Because I think we see adults who get behind a screen and can say the most terrible things that they wouldn't say to someone else's face. So I don't think that it's necessarily because of the child or because of their development. It's because they don't have the awareness, and I think adults struggle with that too. So Is there a danger for them once they enter adulthood if it was just kind of almost this constant nannying where they're like, you don't get to do this ever, to now I'm an adult and I still don't know what that means to hurt someone online. So what are some good ways for us to allow our kids to even understand that, maybe engage with that? Because I think there are certain social aspects that you're denying them of completely, that are going to be crucial to their development to success in modern society because of social media, because of the internet, the way we interact on a daily basis. So are there any tips for that you can give us?
Yeah, no, that's a great question too. And I think it's important for parents to realize that we can protect our children without sheltering them. So my husband and I have many, many, many real conversations with our children all the time. We homeschool, so they are, the poster children of a sheltered environment. But my kids saw the images of the Afghanistan plane and people falling off that jet engine. We want them to know what's really going on. When we have a close friend that commits suicide, we do not hide that from them. They don't just disappear from our lives. We talk through what led to that and the parts that we played in not being aware and not recognizing the cries for help that they were giving us. So I think absolutely educating your children, letting them into the real world. We recently have been showing them clips of different school board meetings of like, okay, here's an example of a parent who's approaching this issue with grace, and look how persuasive they are. Okay, and then here's one who is belittling everyone and yelling, and that's essentially what's happening on social media too. So we absolutely can show them the comment section of examples that we come across in our real life. But you also hit the nail on the head of, I think another key thing as they go into adulthood is if they saw adults modeling the same thing. My phone goes to sleep downstairs at the end of the night. And as parents, we just do a horrible job of that. 61% of parents watch TV while the kids are in the room. And guess what? When a behavioral scientist sits there and checks off how many times the parents interact with each other and with the child, they're distracted as well when the TV's on in the background. How many times do my kids come up to me and I'm just, watching something on YouTube and completely ignore ignore or don't even hear the question they ask me. So that's why it's a family media plan. It's decisions we're all making together. We're going on a vacation and we're taking a tech Sabbath together, and that means mom and dad are doing it too.
Yeah,
that's good. I know one of the things I realized, and we've had conversation about like digital immigrants, digital natives before, and I think it's important to just even realize that about people born before the iPhone and after the iPhone. Even, you know, what a lot of families did in the 90s and still do is suburban areas have created, all right, I used to go outside and run around with my friends, and that's where my park was. That's where all my community was. Well, mom and dad made the decision that we need to move out into a more suburban area, and I probably wouldn't. I live in a pretty, I feel like, safe place, but I'm not letting my kids do a lot of the things that I was able to do as a kid and interact with some of the friends, just because of how I see the world and some of the inherent dangers that are out there now. And so I think realizing some of those differences, and hey, some of my kids' network and some of their best community might be a church friend that's not in the neighborhood. So their only way to connect with them, you know, on a consistent basis might be through, you know, some of the kids' messenger apps or, you know, funny things that they do. And so I think a lot of those things, like, we have played a part in de-urbanizing some of these centers and pulling apart the park and all those kinds of things in the neighborhood. And now, like, these apps or the games that kids play have become this social center where community is built and conversations are had that are innocent as well. And so sometimes we can be drawn to throw the baby out with the bathwater or not even see it equally. Like, hey, that's kind of their park. You know, that's where I used to go for hours a day, and my parents had no clue where I am. Like, that's just not going to happen. But my kids still have those same social needs that I had in that time in life. And so even for us, me and my wife were trying to navigate what that looks like. She was raised in a small town, and all her best friends literally lived across the street from her. That's not the reality for my kids. And so it's just a different world as we expand into our cities and all that kind of stuff too. So there's, I think, geo factors.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm looking at?
But to push back against that a little bit too, I think we have to recognize, so neuroscience shows that face-to-face interactions are one of our greatest sources of happiness and joy. And so it's not, this is the loneliest generation that has ever been recorded since they've been documented things like this. And so the sort of pie in the sky dream that we had, that Facebook and social media would be able to allow the one kid in Hooper, Nebraska who liked Lord of the Rings to be able to find their soulmate and get this big group. And actually there was, I'll probably get into trouble if I pick specifically on that Olympics advertisement that was driving me crazy. I think we have to recognize that the communities that are developing are not satisfying and they're not healthy, and that's what the research is showing. And so it's not the same. It's not the same as the face-to-face interactions that that children who do get the opportunity to have face-to-face interactions are having. These community groups are not satisfying the children. They're not giving them joy. They're not making them feel loved. They're not making them feel included. And it's not enough. And whether that's because their friend in New York can't do anything when their dad dies of cancer, or whether it's except type words. There's no one there to hug them. There's no one there for, in my world, to bring the casserole by. There's no one to sit with me, hold my hands and pray. It's not the same, unfortunately. And we thought it would be. And we are shocked at our human brains. But that's not the first time that's happened in history either, where we thought something made sense on paper, that then when you get it in the human body, it just does not react like we thought.
Well, and I think to your point too, Alex, in all of this screen time conversation, there needs to be kind of defining factors that go into play, because what Alex is talking about, and specifically what you're talking about, I would consider to be two different realms. Because if you look at a community online, these are people from all over the world that you may not know. You may have met the first time online, and that's your only interaction with them. Where I look at my kids, they're 10 and 12. Sorry, I know their ages. I'm their dad. They're 10 and 12, and I know my son. He's into Fortnite and Rocket League and all these different types of video games, things like that. But I mean, when COVID locked us all down, his primary source of social activity was through those games. Mm-hmm. And these are people that he's developing relationships with at school. He has face-to-face relationships with them. But during the week, he doesn't get to see them because we're landlocked in the way that we are, And so there are healthy, and I'm witnessing healthy relationships being built there. And I think you talk to any, 20, 30-year-old guy who plays Call of Duty with his friends every night, they're developing healthy relationships because it's just like having a phone call with your mom or dad who lives out of state. You still have to maintain that relationship somehow. Maybe you can't see them face to face, but you're still having community with them. You're still having dialogue. The updates I'll hear from my 10-year-old son about his friends' families over a game of Fortnite is something older generations would have only experienced over a phone call or something like that, where you didn't see people pushing back and going, oh, the telephone is bad and it's ruining our kids. It goes back to, how we label these things. I think it is important because we can throw the baby out with the bathwater if we just kind of broad stroke. Because even if you look at, I was looking at one study from, I think it was the Lariat Brain Institute, where they did a 10-year study on 12,000 kids, and kids who played video games, their frontal lobe matured so much faster than kids who didn't. And so I think that there's just a lot of times with this conversation where I'm really hesitant sometimes is, okay, we want to play in this fear-based realm a lot of times, and I think that's really, really dangerous, because then it leads to that guilt where we're like, oh, this makes a good headline to say that screen time is, damaging our children, but screen time is so much. I had screen time all the time when I was a kid. It might have been a TV, but it was still screen time. So I think that phrase, when we don't define what that activity is, can be really misleading.
Yep, I agree completely. Yep, and I think it's important for us to just recognize that something is broken. So there's something about the way that the majority of kids are interacting with screens, and I do think the studies show it is social media.
Yeah.
That there was a 56% increase in depression in a year. So that there's something wrong, and there's something broken in how we're doing it that we definitely need to look into and to try to figure out. And whether that means we do have to start to change the way we've been migrating over the last 20 years. And maybe we do have to move away from the suburban, move away from the dream of the acreage, and instead start to make intentional decisions of, no, I'm choosing to be your neighbor. Right. And I'm going to wait for the house to open up across the street from my mom and move in there. That might, we just need to start exploring things like that for the health of our kids.
Yeah.
For me, even hearing all this, like having littles and knowing that I'm coming up into this kind of age of screens, social media, even more, I feel overwhelmed a little bit, because I'm not sure like what's age specific. And then for me, it's like, I feel very aware, like, especially like being on the podcast, I feel like I really like push myself into things that maybe we don't normally talk about, or I wouldn't normally have thought about before. And so it makes me really, this makes me be a more proactive parent. I think it makes me more aware. And so how can I be I guess a more proactive parent in the age where my kids are kind of they're little, but they're moving into social media or more age specific things.
Yeah. So some of the limits are really clear, and they're not from, crazy religious right moms. They're from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So one is that you avoid all screens before the age of 2. 80% of brain development happens in those first 3 years. And so that's a pretty clear recommendation. The caveat I always make with that in clinic is that kind of like you were saying, Eric, there are some interactions that are incredibly productive that can happen on a screen, FaceTiming or Skyping with an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent or someone that loves this child, and that's the only way they're ever going to meet them because they live halfway across the world or even halfway across the country. That might be a great reason to make an exception to the AAP rule. After 2 years of age, between 2 and 5 years of age, the AAP recommends less than an hour of screen time a day, and that it be with co-viewing with an adult. And so that's the age where you're getting into Sesame Street, Curious George, some of those nice educational shows. They're actually only educational if there's a parent in the room with them co-viewing and saying, I don't know, where is Dora's map? Do you think Boots will ever find it? And you have the human interaction. That's what makes those moments memorable for the child. They don't learn from a two-dimensional image, and that's kind of been proven over and over again with baby Einstein and stuff like that. What they learn from is the adult interaction that they had, and that's what solidifies the learning. And then other great rules from the AAP: no screens 1 hour prior to bedtime. That has to do, we haven't gotten into that at all, with sleep deprivation from the blue light frequency that's released by almost all devices and how it suppresses melatonin, which is the chemical in our brain that makes us feel sleepy and gets us ready to transition to sleep. And then not letting children sleep with a phone in their room. And those are the main clearly delineated recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics.
I'm even thinking, like, I have an Alexa and she's like, playing songs, and we have like a show so we can FaceTime with our grandma, but also like when a song plays, like the words are on the screen or like something's happening. So like what is there, like a certain type of screen that they can't, does that count towards my screen time? I don't know.
It depends how much they're sort of looking at it. None of this has been shown with audio things. So podcasts
We're safe.
are wonderful. Audiobooks, all of that. Music, none of this has ever panned out with any of those audible things. And then there's a lot of smaller studies that have shown that actually TV and video games don't have that same link. So I would just say it all depends truly on how much do they notice and does
how much are they paying attention.
Exactly. Can you throw something over it so then you don't even have to worry about it? Because yes, talking to Alexa and having her be able to respond to the boys is exactly what technology is for. It's a really great use of it. Technology is to make our lives better, not that we're a slave to it.
Yes, because I would rather them ask her every day how many days till Christmas than me.
Amen to that.
To do the math.
And don't want to leave Siri out. She's very
Better
capable.
not say it too loud, or everyone's gonna start. Our phones are going.
Don't want her to feel bad. She's like, you guys are talking about Alexa. Well, and I know for me, and that question about different types of interactions and types of screens, I remember when I was a kid, the don't sit too close to the TV. And I didn't really know why, but I tell my kids, don't sit too close to the TV, right? Because if something's going to happen, I don't know. Maybe you could tell me what's going to happen if we sit too close to the TV. And even if there's a difference between like a tube TV and TVs are Plasma, a lot different right now. But I guess how do we start to delineate, how do we start to make decisions about what kinds of screens are appropriate for a kid to watch and the types of activities they're doing on there? So for example, I have a daughter who is deaf, and so she had cochlear implants, and she got them put in right before the pandemic happened. And then all of her audiologist appointments had to move. Well, the audiologist appointments were there, but all of her, what's the word I'm looking for? Her,
like her follow-up appointments?
Yeah, her follow-up appointments with speech pathology. That's the word I'm looking for. I've seen way too many specialists. But speech pathology had to happen over Zoom because we couldn't go to Boys Town anymore and do that. And so we're like sitting in this, we don't really want her to be in front of a screen, but how do we navigate, and do we subtract that from her screen time for the day? And well, we shouldn't now. She's over 2. But so how do we even navigate the differences, the FaceTime, I mean, we're not going to over police this, I don't think is the goal, but how do we start to see what is healthy and what aren't healthy interactions, I guess, with screens? Because it feels like they're everywhere. They're in learning. They're in just literally being entertained. It's a movie. So it's such a vast array of work. I'm looking at a screen in this conversation. So is it time that's solely devoted to like my attention is all the way grabbed on a screen? Or how do we even start to delineate if we're trying to say, okay, 1 hour, what counted towards that 1 hour for my kid, I guess? That's a long way of asking that question.
No, and it's a great question. And the honest answer is we don't know yet.
Yeah.
We just don't have that information yet. So that would just be pure opinion instead of science. And that's where I think the We Start Now and the family media plan, and just going back to what is our goal in discipling our children, and getting back to some of those basic questions of what's our family mission? What is my hope as a mom when these kids leave the house as adults? And just like we do with almost any decision we make, bringing it back to that basic of does this help us move towards our goal as parents, or is it just something that crept in without us really thinking about the why behind it? And frankly, that's true whether it's signing up for select baseball or deciding to let my 7-year-old learn how to program. That's the kind of intentionality that I'm praying for me and for everyone, that we can start really thinking through the why, and does it go back to that goal?
I love that.
For my wife and I, one of the things that we've tried to implement in a lot of ways, because my kids are 8, 6, 4, and 2, and the 8 and 6-year-old are testing boundaries more and more, and I think that's healthy. But in understanding that we're not fighting with our kids, we're fighting for our kids, and I think that even having that mindset around, whether it's screen time, and you're like, no, buddy, like, we're not doing this for a while. Like, we're letting them watch before an hour before bed. Like, that was kind of the last routine. And then, you came in to MOPS and then our pediatrician as well, was like, hey, this isn't, you shouldn't, that's not healthy. And so to make that jump as a family was difficult, but we had to keep reminding ourselves, this isn't a fight with our kids. This is a fight for our kids. And our kids just can't understand that, but our kids are worth fighting for. But even changing that, reminding ourselves of that posture when you're in the middle of that argument, this isn't with my kids, this is for my kids, helped us, kind of keep our foot down and keep rolling in that direction, because they're worth fighting for. But when you feel like you're just fighting with them, it gets tiring, and I feel like you're going to throw up the white flag and surrender in that moment. So,
yeah, that's so great. That's really good.
That's what I have to say about that. Any other questions? Sorry.
I think one thing that we haven't touched on that just, it plays a role in so many things. And I feel like it's part of this conversation too, is just pornography and how accessible that can be, and how much, even we're us talking about setting boundaries and phones not being in rooms and fighting for our kids, like all those things to me are almost like fighting against this big monster that is behind different places that kids can go on screen. So
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about native versus immigrant. It's really hard for parents to realize that first porn exposure is no longer in that random corner of the store. The average age of first porn exposure now is 11. And porn addiction works a lot like drug addiction. The earlier the first exposure is, the more likely it is that they'll become addicted to hard porn especially. And so when they're exposed at 9 or 8, the chance that they're going to be spending 23 out of 24 hours a day looking at porn has just gone up exponentially, just like if they take their first drink of alcohol when they're 8 or 9 as opposed to 13 or 14. So recognizing that their first porn exposure is going to be online most likely, and it comes in unexpected ways. For our family, it happened because Kim Kardashian is newsworthy, and when she posts a selfie, my ABC News app push notification pops up. So my son's doing a research project for his science class, and boom, there's Kim Kardashian's photo, because that's just as important as America pulling out of Afghanistan as far as ABC News is concerned. And now he's seen this image that fires off all these chemicals in his brain that he doesn't understand, and now we're having that conversation. So for parents, I highly recommend that conversation happen at a very early age. 4, 5, 6 is not too young. A great book is called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and it's a wonderful way.
Yeah, they're an official sponsor.
I feel like we should high five each other.
That's fantastic.
We have that book too.
Good. Yeah, it's so conversational, and I love the science, how it explains it all, and addiction and everything like that. But yeah, the statistics for teens are they're just depressing. That 20% of 13 to 17-year-olds view porn weekly, 20% monthly, and then when you get into the 18 to 24-year-old group, and all of these stats are like so old now. I mean, when you do a study and you come up with these statistics, they're already a year old, and
so they're probably
quoting
higher now.
Oh, way higher, because I'm quoting things from 4 years ago. So now it's then 30% weekly, 20% monthly, and only 10% of 18 to 24-year-olds admit to never having viewed porn before. There's new medical diagnoses coming out all the time of like erection dysfunction because of porn. And for a while, pediatricians were excited because we were seeing the number of teens engaging in sexual intercourse dropping. But the reason it's dropping is because they're viewing porn. So why in the world would you engage with a messy face-to-face relationship when you can have this totally skewed view, unnaturally exciting porn addiction instead, or just porn view instead? So recognizing that the new increase in celibate 20-something males, it may not be the great news that we think it is. And that it's because of another underlying very dark current in our culture.
And I think the ripples of that are, I mean, it's not just porn. It's like then kids are younger and younger being able to learn how to manipulate, how to hide things, how to be people that are, especially like, you know, our cell phones, like there's apps literally that people are creating to be able to hide, you know, things. And our lives are becoming much more synergized on like a device. I can be, you know, reading the Lord's Prayer one moment on the same device and not even transition to a different spot and be looking at porn, you know? And so it's just teaching us, and I think eroding, you know, our inherent value and how we see people, you know, and those types of things, but also how because when you know you're doing something you shouldn't, then you become better and better at hiding it, which also leads to other ramifications in your life outside of just the damage porn is doing, but the damage in relationships and trust and all of that, and addiction that are the ramifications as well. So,
you know, and that also reminds me again back to that native immigrant. I really do love that that metaphor. I also encourage parents to have a different kind of stranger danger conversation. Every kindergartner knows if an adult sits next to him on a park bench in the park and starts asking him to help him look for their puppy or offering him candy, they get up and run away. But most parents aren't having that same stranger danger conversation when they're online. And when they're playing a game and there's a chat box going next while they're playing, they need to realize that anyone that's talking to them that they don't know in real life really is that username is a stranger. And I've had, unfortunately, more patients than I'd like to count that have gotten into just horrible things that they heard and saw and learned from that stranger in the chat box, just because they were innocently playing a game. But there's some, you know, yuck stranger that they didn't recognize as stranger danger because there wasn't a face that was clearly an adult sitting next to them in a park.
Well, it seems like so much of this conversation, I mean, it partially stems from guilt. It partially stems from fear. And I think just a common feeling, emotion that most parents have is like, I don't want to screw my kid up. Like that's just the core of it, right? Like that's where this comes from. And so I think there is a desire to protect our kids. Is there anything else that you want to share with us that just to kind of alleviate that like we're not all going to do this exactly perfect. But what's the hope in this? Like where are we, where are we seeing success, or what can we look for as parents to go, okay, I'm on the right track?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I don't want to leave people just with the doom and gloom. One of my favorite sermon series that I ever heard was on the 10 Commandments. And the first Sunday, our pastor went through what the commandment outlawed. And then the second Sunday, we came back and he talked about what a gift we were being given in obeying this commandment. And I feel like reclaiming our tech use is the same thing, that when we focus on the positive of what we're gaining back as families, it is such a reward of being able to have these face-to-face interactions with our children, the time that we gain back, that I'm no longer wasting in my rabbit hole, and instead we're playing games where we truly have had to reach out to other generations to figure out, what did you do on a Friday night before you watched a movie and had pizza together? Because sometimes the Belin household doesn't have enough screen time left in the week to do that. And so what do we do instead? And the joy that it's brought back to our house. And there's another great, James K.A. Smith has a great book of helping you to recognize what's
what you love.
Yes, you are what you love,
So
and what's at the heart or hearth of your home, and having that transfer back to our family room. That what's at the heart and hearth of our home is no longer a screen, but instead our game table or our dining room table or our bikes, if that ends up being what we center around as a family. That there is so much joy to get back, and it really is fun, honestly. And then, as you guys have this community that other families are making the same decisions, and suddenly the play dates are happening more often, and the group interactions are happening more often, and it really is just a gift that we've been given to think about a different way of living.
So as we kind of come to a close, I think just practical steps, us, we're all parents, 12 to 2. And what, if we want to take steps right now towards helping this in the lives of our family, what are practical steps we can take? I know you mentioned maybe the Belin family doesn't have enough screen time left on a Friday. Can you explain that? I mean, I think my wife, heard that as you can bank some of maybe your screen time and things like that. And so we started to implement that. So what are some just practical nuggets that you would say for a family you can start to talk about and implement tomorrow to start taking steps to be proactive in this area?
It's going to be different for everyone. And so I definitely don't want to make anyone think that they have to look like what the Belin family looks like. Yeah. It started for us with a conversation first between my husband and I of what changes do we feel called to make, because I think that's really important. It is a heart change, honestly, as all addictions are. And I will admit, I am addicted to technology. Yeah. I totally don't like going away from it. I feel very weird if my phone's not near me. I absolutely check it every 4.3 minutes or whatever the normal stat is. Yeah. So first starting with my husband and I having that conversation, and then talking with our kids. Ours go from 9 to 15, so they're all old enough to participate in that with us, and explaining. And it's a humble conversation. Oh, it's a humble conversation. We're going to make some changes because we didn't know better, or we knew better, but we chose to ignore it because we really, really, really like Disney movies, just like you do. And I love the BBC British dramas, and I didn't want to give them up. And so truly being honest with my kids that this is going to be hard for me, just like it is for you. And there's going to be days that we want to go back to a different way. But just like that sermon series, it's not all about the no's. There's a gift that we're being offered in this as well. But I would go back to for sort of the clear what should and shouldn't you be doing. I think those AAP recommendations of the hour limits, of the ages, are something that's really good to pay attention to. And so we do try to live by those in my house, where my kids are at an age where it's an hour. I do it as entertainment a day, just because so much learning is online now. And so if they know that we're going to a movie, or we have this plan to watch a movie together as a family, or a Husker game's coming up, that my kids are totally on board of like, yeah, let's save that up. It's honestly the same as exercise and desserts in our house, that we save up because we know, oh yeah, so-and-so's having a birthday party and I want to gorge myself on that cake. So that means I need to avoid these treats throughout the week so that I'm ready for Saturday. And it's the same way with screen time. There's also, as you move into the older ages, there's some really great resources out there. Common Sense Media. I'm sure you guys have talked about a lot of these things before. Net Nanny, Circle for Disney. There's lots of great ways to help guide your kids into having their own phones, having their own accounts, but still being there as the parent to monitor, just like teaching them how to drive. How many hours do we log in the car with our 15-year-old before they go out on their own with their license? And so explaining it in the same way to your adolescent or teenager whenever you decide to do it, that, okay, this is a learner's permit, which means you've got me in the driver's or in the passenger seat next to you. So I'm going to be monitoring your texts. I'm going to be monitoring what you're saying in the chat box, how you're responding to people with comments. And that's just part of it. And teaching them. And that's a great opportunity, as you were saying, Eric, to really start to introduce them of, okay, so when I read this, I think what you meant was X, but the tone that you don't understand you have, and do you see how that upset her? And just walking them through that process. And with these resources that allow you literally to see everything your child is posting, that's worth its weight in gold. And they are expensive. Some of them are very expensive. There's lots that are free, but those are more the filters. The actual monitoring devices do cost. And then they start to graduate and they get their driver's license. And you're still there when they have an accident, and you're there to talk about, okay, your insurance rate just went up, which maybe that definition of that for then their device use is that you're back in the passenger seat again, helping them again to learn how to make those turns and when to stop. And so I do think thinking about it like we teach children to drive is a really great metaphor that maybe helps a lot of parents wrap their head around. I'm not being a jerk. I'm not being overly controlling. I do the same thing with a vehicle because it's frankly just as dangerous.
Yeah, I thank God pretty much daily that I didn't have social media when I was a teenager. I don't know if I'd have my job, because
absolutely,
just to try to entertain people. Not that I did a bunch of stupid stuff, but I'm like, I would have probably, just because I want to entertain and be the center of attention, I would have just done stupid things for a laugh and videotape them. That would be biting me today. So thank you, Lord.
Forever.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Marie. This has been really good,
Seriously.
really insightful. I hope people are able to take a lot away from this. If nothing else, it'll be a good resource that they might need to listen back to. We covered a lot, so thank you.
Thank you.
And if you have any questions or concerns, you want to reach out to us, you can do that on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. We'd love to hear from you. But until then, we'll talk to you later.